Linux Mint is one of the best, if not the best, GNU/Linux distributions for beginners, not only for newbies but also for intermediate and advanced Linux users. The standard Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu, comes with 3 flavors, 3 desktop environments, its flagship Cinnamon, then Mate, and finally extremely lightweight XFCE. All 3 desktop environments are presented in almost the same way, and they recreate classic workflow familiar to users who started their computing in earlier versions of the Microsoft Windows operating system. There's also a Linux Mint version based on Debian, and it's called Linux Mint Debian Edition or LMDE, which also features Cinnamon desktop environment. And now, here we come to the question, what does it actually mean, classic desktop paradigm, in this day and age? Is the workflow similar to earlier versions of Windows really familiar to newer generations? They've grown up mostly with smartphones and Android operating system, which offers totally different user experience and workflow compared to one of the classic PCs. So the question also arises, should Linux Mint, as a beginner-friendly GNU/Linux distribution, go with something more familiar to newer generations? Something like Gnome 3 or Gnome 4 desktop environments that resemble Android at first sight. For the video, we have prepared a newly installed Linux Mint Debian Edition. To show you what it might look like, we will install Gnome desktop environment available in the LMDE 4, which is still the current version of LMDE as of the time of recording this video. In the Synaptic Package Manager, we search for Gnome, and the search returns many results, including some Gnome apps already installed. And that is not a coincidence, which we will explain later in the video. There's also an entry in the repositories called Gnome Shell, but that's not the package you should mark for installation. So, what you should find and install is an entry called task-gnome-desktop, which will pull all the necessary packages and dependencies for a full-blown Gnome desktop environment installed. At a certain point during the installation, Synaptic Package Manager will ask you to choose the default display manager, and at this point, our choice was to leave the LightDM as default because it's already the default display manager in Linux Mint. The installation process goes well, and finally, the package manager informs us that all changes are applied. After the system reboot, now a user needs to choose the desktop for the session. In this case, we will choose Gnome. The result of the Gnome desktop environment installation in LMD is a Debian-like Gnome 3 desktop. It has all of the features of the Gnome desktop and its version 3.30.2. Just a reminder, the Gnome desktop environment main feature is an empty desktop with the panel at the top. There, in the right-hand corner, you'll find your system tray with multiple controls. In the middle of the panel, there's the notification center with calendar, world clocks, and the weather applet. And on the left-hand side, there's the activities button, which triggers the favorites dock and workspace view. Now we have also Gnome's Nautilus file manager, known as Files, installed. Even though it's not the native Gnome install, the file manager is perfectly incorporated in the Linux Mint desktop theme, and it doesn't look out of place in our view. We have also got the Gnome software app installed. Clicking the grid at the bottom of the favorites dock triggers the app grid on the desktop, which looks pretty much like the Android app grid. All the applications installed on the system are shown, and as you can see, they all respect the Linux Mint system theme and icon set. Note that there's still Linux Mint's Nemo file manager there. Just in case you're not familiar with how the Gnome desktop environment works, you need to know that it offers the workspace view for switching between apps. As an example, we open some of the apps installed. Pressing the super key on your keyboard will show you all the open apps. Then you can move an app to the next workspace. As we have explained before, when moving an app to a different workspace, the system adds another workspace, so you have a free workspace to work with at any time. The Gnome's Settings app allows you to customize your installation, including changing your background. It includes both Gnome's and Linux Mint's default wallpapers, obviously. Now, as we have already said in the video, there are some duplicate apps after we have installed Gnome desktop environment. Like two file managers, where the Gnome's one, Files, looks perfectly within the Linux Mint. And it doesn't come as a surprise in our view, because Linux Mint is actually a fork of the GNOME 3 desktop environment, or its cousin, we could say, derived from GNOME 3. Or we can take text editors, for instance. With the Gnome desktop environment, we installed gedit, Gnome's default text editor, while Z, the Linux Mint's default text editor, has already been there. Just so you know, Z is also a fork of gedit. System utilities that you will find in Linux Mint, even after you install GNOME Desktop, are there because those are Gnome's apps anyway, just like Disk Usage Analyzer, also known as Baobab. So what we have now actually is a modern GNOME desktop environment in Linux Mint, and not just a plain GNOME, but with Mint's user-friendly tools, such as Mint's Update Manager, which is a very useful app in terms of the system maintenance. For the sake of productivity, we will just check if the GNOME software app in Linux Mint works as it should. Let's install an application. As on many occasions before, we will try to install Audacity, our favorite audio editing app. It's found in the Debian repositories, and we click the Install button. The installation was a breeze. The application starts just fine. Linux Mint is one of our favorite GNU/Linux distributions. We don't know what resources the Linux Mint team has at their disposal, so we are not there to judge. It's just that we believe that to attract even more users, the team maybe should consider creating a GNOME flavor of Linux Mint. Yes, GNOME sometimes can be a resource hog, and besides, vanilla GNOME is not our favorite desktop environment. But if you need a rock-solid GNU/Linux distribution with a simple desktop environment, and at the same time with modern apps and feel to it, you can easily have it in Linux Mint by installing GNOME desktop environment on your own. You'll get a stable, dependable and modern system that just works. We hope you've liked the video. Like it, share it, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done it already. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.